Princess Lyra, The Start, HFY. William Leyton's life began unraveling with a sneeze, and it wasn't even his. 3 years ago, his brother Richard and his sister-in-law Hetty had been killed in a mining accident. This was how he had become the legal guardian of his niece Emma. It had been quite the adjustment for them both, but they had made it work. Today, they were visiting the embassy of Greater Valcorian Empire. The first aliens that humans had met, they had made contact 3 years ago. Valcorians looked like humans, with 2 exceptions. The first was the fact that their skin was blue, the second was the fact that they had elven ears. What really made them different was the fact that they breathed other gases than humans. William and Emma had been in the lobby, a room bigger than their entire apartment. Emma had brown eyes under short brown hair, both of which she shared with her uncle. The 2 of them lived in London above a bookstore. At the moment, however, they were looking on in horror as something went very wrong. They had been studying a piece of art in the middle of the lobby. It was basically an alien house of cards, until Emma had sneezed, which was causing the artwork to collapse. The 2 of them exchanged looks. "Oh no," Emma said, "this is bad." "Don't worry, I'm sure it will be." "Guards, seize them." Somebody roared before William could tell Emma that everything would be okay. 2 very cranky Valcorian guards grabbed William's arms, while a third grabbed Emma. In order to breathe, they were wearing special masks over their mouths, which made them look even more angry. The guards dragged them towards a door before they could object. William got the feeling that this was not going to end well. 5 minutes later, Emma and William were in a cell that looked like it had been plucked from the Middle Ages. Bare stone walls and a single heavy metal door surrounded them. Light came from a single bare bulb and a tiny barred window opposite the door. They were sitting on a wooden bench. "We're going to be carted off to spend the rest of our lives on bread and water," Emma said. "No, we're not. That only happens in movies." As if on cue, the door opened and a Valcorian woman in a gray business suit entered. She looked like she was in her 20s, but Valcorians lived about 300 years. So William figured she was probably a lot older. She had white hair and green eyes. Like the guards, she was wearing a breather masker. But it was fitted with a speaker so that her voice, which was calm and gentle, could be heard clearly. "Please follow me." They were led to a small office. The woman sat down behind a desk while gesturing towards 2 chairs facing it. Emma and William sat down in the chairs. "My name is Valera Pazora. I'm the assistant to Ambassador Dinar. And you are William Leyton, correct? 38 years old, from London. You sell books for a living." William nodded. "And you are Emma, his niece, 8 years old and part of Miss Henderson's class. Your best grades are in history and English." Emma nodded and swallowed, but Pazora smiled at her, which she could see from the wrinkles around her eyes. "I loved history, well. Of course, I studied on a whole different planet." "Which is really cool," Emma said. "Yes, it is," Pazora said with a grin. "Now, I've managed to explain the situation to the ambassador, and he wants to solve this situation as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the artist who made the artwork is a real grump. He wants compensation for the lost materials. And he used an extremely fragile material called samarium, which is why he can't simply put the artwork back together." "How much?" William asked. "Samarium is extremely expensive. It would cost several million Terran credits." Pazora paused. "Even in the best-case scenario, it would take over 80 years to raise the necessary funds selling books." "Oi," Emma said, while making a face. "It talked to Ambassador Dinar, and he came up with an alternate plan, but it's not going to be very fun either. The Valcorian Royal Palace is in need of a janitor. If you get the job, you would be able to pay the amount in 14 Earth months." "What is the downside? Other than having to move to another planet, I mean." "Princess Lyra of the Greater Valcorian Empire," Pazora said, while Emma made a face. "Let me guess, you heard about her in school?" Emma nodded yes. "Lyra is a nasty piece of work, Haughty, arrogant, and spoiled, she goes through servants as you and I go through toothpicks. Is there a plan C? Emma asked. Pazora shook her head, leaving William and Emma exchanging looks. 2 weeks later, the Valcorian transport Ormac landed outside the Valcorian royal palace. It was a massive building made out of some kind of crystal. There were no windows, but it did have heavy doors made out of solid black wood. This time around, William and Emma were the ones wearing special breather masks. When they disembarked, a man was waiting for them with a sign that had their names on it. He appeared to be middle-aged, with kind eyes and a smile that made Emma feel better about being here. Welcome to Valcor Prime. I'm Axel, the head of palace staff. Princess Lyra is away, touring military bases, so I have today to help you settle in. I'll take you to your quarters, and then once you're unpacked, I'll give you a tour of the palace. Nice to meet you, William offered his hand, and the two of them shook hands. And that sounds like a good idea. Axel led the way towards the palace. Unpacking had taken half an hour, followed by an amazing tour of the palace. It had been during that tour that Emma had been introduced to Jaya. Jaya was the teacher assigned to educating the children of the palace staff. Her classroom was located in the palace basement. For security reasons, the children weren't allowed to leave the palace grounds. Fortunately, the building was massive and full of secret passages. It was through one of these passages that Emma had found what she called the lair. The lair had originally been a room for maintaining part of the air circulation system, but when the system had been upgraded long ago, it had become unnecessary. The door had been locked, but the air vents in and out of the room were still wide open. Emma used the lair to do her homework without being interrupted by adults. She had figured out how to adjust the air inside the room so that she could take her breather mask off during her 4th visit. She also knew that the lair was above the very top of the throne room. Axel had taken them there during the tour. Strictly off-limits when the princess was in the palace, they'd been the first humans to set foot in the room. A massive room with jewels and expensive stone decorating the walls, it had a curved ceiling. The lowest part was 12 meters above the floor, with the highest being 22 meters tall. That part sat over the throne. Emma had found out that somebody else had installed a peeping hole in the floor of the lair that allowed a view of the throne. She was clearly not the first person to use the lair. On their 9th day in the palace, she was doing her biology homework, where there was suddenly a lot of noise below her. Looking through the peephole, she could see why. Princess Lyra had come home. Moving a loose strand of her platinum blonde hair out of her golden eyes, Lyra sat down on the throne and sighed. She was surrounded by idiots, again. For the past couple of days, she had been surrounded by military idiots. Now she was surrounded by the usual idiots once more. And it was about to get worse. For over 2.5 years, King Hiron had been pushing her to get married. Her father was getting up there in years and wanted to retire. But the law made it clear that she could not succeed him until she had a husband. So once a month, some fool showed up and tried to woo her. Nobles, rich businessmen, diplomats, soldiers, and many other men of import showed up and attempted to convince her that they were worthy. The Valcorian year had 15 months, and she had 3 years to make her selection, meaning that the candidate pool was 45 options deep. She had met 40 of them, and none of them had impressed her. They were all empty-headed fools with giant egos. This song and dance was why she had been forced to come home. Today's candidate was a Defense Force admiral with enough medals to bury a village. The main doors open to the throne room opened. Fleet Admiral Harrow the Great, the herald announced. Lyra sighed as the herald launched into a list of the admiral's many victories. Time to see the latest fool her father had sent her. While Emma resumed doing her homework and Lyra listened to Harold droning on and on, Jaya was panicking. Princess Lyra hated children with a passion. She had given strict orders to keep the children in the basement when she was in the palace. The basement was 5 floors deep and had plenty of facilities, so that was not that bad. But getting the children down there could be a hard task. She had managed to get everybody there safely, out of Lyra's reach. Except for Emma. "Come on, where are you?" She turned a corner and nearly collided with somebody. It was William Leyton, or so Jaya presumed. He and Emma were the only humans in the palace. Earth's ambassador, an elderly human called Vincent de Sal, spent his time in the human embassy, which was several streets away from the palace. "Whoa, you okay?" "I'm fine. You're William Leyton, correct?" He nodded confirmation. "I'm looking for Emma. The princess hates children, and if she finds Emma outside the basement, well, it won't be pretty." "I see." William paused as he pondered. "I think I know where she is." He offered her his hand, which she took. They continued down the corridor together. Emma was working on her math homework when William poked his head into the lair. It was a small room with a desk and a crate that served as her chair. What looked like Christmas lights provided lighting for the room. Of course, this was an alien planet, so Christmas was not a thing here. But the lights didn't care about that. Emma looked up from her work. "Uncle Will," she asked, "how did you know where I was? The lair is a secret." "Because I'm smart, and I used to love secret hideaways myself, so did your dad. I'll tell you about our tree fortress someday." He entered the room, still wearing his breather mask. "You even modified the atmosphere in here. Amazing." "You can say that again," Jaya said as she entered the lair. "Unfortunately, the basement rule is now in effect." "Sorry, I forgot." "For the record, I think it's a stupid rule, but I can't change it." Emma nodded and began packing up her stuff. When she was done, she put on her breather mask. William led the way out of the lair. They crawled through the air ducts, which dropped them near an elevator. When they had arrived, Axel had given them both a special monocle. It wasn't really a monocle, but a translation lens. Universal translators were small devices that people, including Emma, wore in their ears and translated spoke language. But they were no good in translating written text. So the Valcorians had invented translator lenses to help with that. It was how Emma was able to read her schoolbooks, despite them being in Valcorian script, and it was also handy for reading elevators' buttons. As soon as all three of them were inside, Emma pressed the button marked Sublevel 1. The doors closed, and the cart raced down. Which was why they didn't see Admiral Harrow storming out of the palace. Lyra had rejected him, and she hadn't been subtle about it. The princess had insulted him and made light of his achievements. Harrow was an old man by Valcorian standards, with pale green eyes, lots of wrinkles, and gray hair. But he was no pushover, and he was not going to take this laying down. Even as he stormed out, he was already drawing up plans in his head. Lyra watched him go and cackled. She would not have to deal with the next fool for another month. Stretching, she walked out of the throne room. The trip to her quarters was by means of a flight of stairs. Her living quarters were located at the very top of the palace. It was the only level of the complex with windows, but it was so high up that you couldn't see the windows from the grounds surrounding the structure. These windows allowed her to see the city beyond the grounds. The city of Zalov was the capital of Valcor Prime. Besides the palace, it was also home to the Stellar Senate House and several imperial government buildings. Lyra yelled for her assistant, a young lady called Wilma, and demanded her favorite drink, which was Jala berry tea. She hoped that this foolish girl would be able to get it right. Her last assistant, whose name she had already forgotten, had not been able to do so. So, after 3 weeks, Lyra had fired her. That had been the day she had left for her military tour. Only time would tell if this new flunky would last. Weeks passed. William discovered that the palace was a lot more Terran than it appeared at first glance. The floors still needed polishing, water pipes, where apparently universal and electricity ran through wires not matter what planet you were on. He got to know other staff members. Like Gyno from the kitchen, Bea, who was assigned to keeping the bed linen fresh. Marrow was in charge of staff supplies, and Zin guarded the throne room. And the list went on. They told him and Emma horror stories about how the princess treated the staff. 3 more suitors came and went, each brutally rejected. But that was not William's problem. He simply needed to stay out of Lyra's way. This became easier when he joined the staff Yamal games. Yamal turned out to be closest thing the Valcorians had to poker, and William was good at it. So he had quickly built up a nice little stockpile of favors. As for his debt to the artist, that was shrinking as scheduled. Well, technically, the Valcorian embassy had paid the man off, and he was paying them back. Meanwhile, Emma was learning a lot about Valcorians. She was also using her old schoolbooks, which she had brought along to teach some of her more curious classmates about Earth and humans. Her best friend was HFY, who was Bea's daughter. When you compensated for their different lifespans and year durations, the 2 girls were about the same age. At moment, they were spying on Viscount Wallen, the 3rd of the Great Northern Island. They had found a loophole in the basement rule in the form of storage room 14B. This was where they stored the gear for cleaning the outside of the palace, so it had a very high ceiling, but it was still technically part of the basement. And near the ceiling, there was a ventilation grate that allowed the girls to spy on the throne room. Well, they had needed to stack some crates to get to the grate first, but it had worked. You know, between the lair above and this grate below, the throne room is leaky like a sieve, Emma said. I know, HFY said. Mr. Zinn complains about how hard it is to secure all the time. They watched as Viscount Wallen approached the throne. The grate was just above the throne room floor, so they only saw his feet at first, but more of the Viscount became visible as he walked closer to his goal. How long do you think he's going to last? Not very long. She only needed 10 seconds to get rid of the last one. The Viscount arrived at the throne and began a long speech about politics, trade relations, and the usual boring stuff that suitors always talked about. So, HFY began, how are things going between Jaya and William? What are you talking about? Oh, come on, have you not seen how those 2 look at one another? They like each other. Like really, really like each other. Emma was about to tell HFY that she was wrong. But then her stomach dropped as she realized that HFY was right. Whenever William and Jaya met, they smiled at each other in a certain way. The fact that William had taught her how to play poker. The time she had gone to sleep over with HFY, while William and Jaya had gone to have dinner. Emma bit her lower lip. But before she could say anything, the Viscount finished his speech. Now it was just a matter of seeing and listening what Lyra would say to kick him out the door. Several floors lower, William was dealing with a leaky pipe and doing his best not think of Jaya. Which made him think of Jaya even more. Her smile, her wonderful purple eyes, the way she tucked her red hair behind her elven ears when she was worried about something. In short, just how amazing she was. But he knew that she was out of his reach. She was an alien. Even if they could find a way to breathe the same atmosphere, there was the issue of bacteria and viruses. One wrong germ, and with his luck, he'd end up mutating into something horrible with a taste for humanoid flesh. And the whole thing about humans and aliens being able to make babies was just Hollywood nonsense. That was simply not how DNA worked. Not to mention that as soon as he finished paying his debt to the embassy, he and Emma would be heading back to Earth. In short, this whole thing was totally doomed. But he still really, really liked her, and he got the impression that she liked him as well. He finished fixing the leak and took out a scanner he had been issued by Axel on his 2nd day. Before he reported in, he had to make sure that fixing this leak hadn't caused another one somewhere else. So he began scanning. Emma and HFY made faces. Lyra's takedown of the Viscount had been brutal. The man was now storming out of the palace, which made Emma wonder what would happen next. The Viscount had been the last suitor, so the princess had run out of time. Soon, the king would want an answer on who she was going to marry. The problem was that she had turned them all down. You think the king is going to come down here in person? HFY asked. Maybe, Emma said. Why doesn't he life in this palace to start with? To make it harder for anybody to overthrow the royal family. I think you called it not putting all your eggs in one basket, Emma nodded. Besides, they have 6 palaces on the homeworld alone. Seems kind of a waste. Emma put her hand over Hypa's mouth to silence her, because Lyra was standing up and walking towards the grate. She made several hand signals with her free hand, and the two of them quickly climbed down the pile of crates. Hypa pulled Emma into a dark corner of the storage room just as the footsteps stopped. Lyra barked an order at one of the guards, who then got down on the floor and pushed open the grate. He stuck his head through the hole. After looking around for a bit, the man disappeared. He told the princess the room was empty. "Are you sure?" Lyra asked. "Yes, Your Highness. Nothing but crates and cleaning supplies, ma'am." Lyra grumbled something and walked away. Emma and Hypa let out a sigh of relief. Things were quiet for the 4 months that followed the Viscount's rejection. Then, King Hiron's patience ran out. It was a regular Tuesday when the monarch of the greater Valcorian Empire arrived. There was no warning before it happened. William standing on a ladder when he found out about Hiron's presence. He was fixing a short circuit in the lights in one of the corridors on the 4th floor. To do that, he had opened one of the few maintenance panels in the crystal walls. Zin came around the corner and told him to finish as fast as he could. "What's wrong?" "King Hiron is here. He wants Lyra's answer on who she is going to marry." "I don't think she wants to marry anybody. But if she says that to the king, especially to his face." "Yeah, that is not going to end well for her," Zin said, just as William found the problem and fixed it. He closed the panel and climbed down the ladder. "Ready to go, we have to get out of here before." "The king shows up," a male voice said. The two of them turned to see the king standing in corridor. He was an elderly man with gray hair and kind blue eyes, wearing very expensive-looking robes in the colors red and gold. On his head was a silver crown covered in jewels unlike any William had ever seen before. He figured they were probably not found on Earth. Zin knelt before the man, while William snapped to attention. Behind the monarch was a collection of aides and officials. "At ease, guard Zin," the king said. "You may stand." Zin got to his feet. "Now, Mr. Leyton, did you mean what you said, that my Lyra doesn't want to get married?" "Can I go for the neither confirm or deny option, Your Highness? The last thing I want is to cause diplomatic incident, sire." "Again, you mean," the king smiled. "Yes, I do know about the events in our embassy on Earth and how it brought you here. Now, did you mean what you said?" "I do, Your Highness. I believe that Princess Lyra has no desire to marry any of the 45 suitors that have visited her over the past 3 years, sire." "I see." The king paused as he took the answer in. "Thank you, Mr. Leyton." The king continued on his way, with his entourage following. William and Zin watched him go. Then William quickly packed up his ladder and tools. He had just survived an encounter with the king. The last thing he needed was to push his luck. Lyra was furious. Her father had arrived to demand that she choose a husband, and her instincts were telling her that it was that old fart Admiral Harrow that had made this happen. So here she was, pacing her quarters as she tried to make an impossible choice. 45 options and all of them bad. She yelled at her aide, calling her by her title instead of her name. Wilma hadn't lasted longer than a couple of days. Since then, she had been going through aides like other people went through socks. Lyra didn't even bother learning their names anymore. The aide gave her the drink she was about to ask for. She sipped it and was surprised to find it was actually good. It improved her mood somewhat, but it didn't answer the impossible question she was facing. This wasn't some computer-generated fairy tale, this was real life. And she had to get it right. Then her father's herald, a living fossil called Samok, entered the room. It meant that her father was downstairs, sitting on the throne. It was his way of demanding her obedience. Taking a deep breath, she walked out of the room. The descent towards the throne room felt like lowering into the underworld. Finally, she entered the throne room. Her father was indeed sitting on the throne. His advisors were sitting in chairs that the palace staff had placed while she was in her quarters. Normally, the throne was the only seat in the massive chamber. She kneeled at her father's feet. It was a humbling experience. His voice was calm, but she could hear the fury under the surface. "Tell me, daughter, have you made your choice?" "No, father, I have not," she said, keeping it honest. He was angry as it was, and lying to him would only make it worse. The silence between them was heavy and charged. Then her stomach dropped as she realized that he had figured out the truth, that she had no intention of picking anybody to marry. Finally, Hiram got to his feet and came down from the throne. "You were never going to pick a husband, were you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Very well." Her father walked past her. Because he had not given her permission to get up, she remained on her knees. She heard him move away slowly. "I hate this throne room," he began. "It is too big, it is too impersonal, it's a nightmare to secure, and acoustics are just plain weird." He had reached the far side of the throne room. "What do you think, Emma and Hypa?" Down in storage room 14B, Emma and Hypa swallowed. They jumped down the crates they used to get up to the grate and ran from the room, but that was as far they got. 2 guards were waiting for them. Each put a hand on one of their shoulders, while wearing a look on their face that made it clear that escape was not an option. Emma and Hypa were led into the throne room. Princess Lyra was now standing, while the king was sitting on the throne. 2 chairs had been placed and were facing the throne. The 2 girls were shaking as they sat down on the chairs. "So, girls," the king began, his voice calm and kind. "What would say if I said that Lyra had to marry William?" "No," Hypa blurted, before blushing as she remembered who she was talking to. "I mean, no, please, your highness. She's—" Lyra glared at her and she swallowed, but the king shut down her glare with one of her own. "She's cranky, arrogant, and spoiled, sire." "And my dad?" Emma bit her lower lip. "Well, he hasn't said so out loud, but I think he's in love with Miss Jaya." "I see." The king scratched his face. "Well, I can't keep ruling forever, and the law says that she has to get married before she can take over the empire." "You are going to let these brats decide my future?" Princess Lyra snapped. "I gave you 3 years of decide your future," Hiram said, his anger replaced by an icy calm, "and you gave me nothing but excuses." Lyra's mouth opened, but nothing came out, so the king turned back to the children. "Now, I'm asking your opinion about this situation. Girls, what do you think I should do?" The 2 girls looked at one another, both making a face. Then Hypa had an idea and whispered something into Emma's right ear. Emma seemed to process what she had said, then turned to the king. "Have you ever heard of an artist called Markle IV?" "Ah, the man whose artwork was destroyed when you sneezed in the embassy?" "Yes, I read the report when it passed my desk. I needed to sign off on you and your father coming here, so I was fully briefed on the embassy incident." He smiled and nodded. "Thank you, girls." Now, Miss Jaya's first lesson starts in 5 minutes. Guards, escort the young ladies to the classroom. The guards bowed and then escorted Emma and Hypa out of the throne room. As soon as the doors closed behind them, they could hear Lyra start to object. To be continued. Princess Lyra, the End, HFY. It had been 13 months since William Leyton and his niece Emma had arrived at the Valcorian royal palace. Back then, Emma had been 8, but she had turned 9 several months ago. As for the why, the short version of the story was that Emma had accidentally broken a very expensive piece of art. To pay for the repair, William had taken a maintenance job at the palace. It was the only way he could afford the bill in a reasonable amount of time. Since they had arrived, Emma had made friends. And William, he had fixed things and fallen in love with Emma's teacher, Miss Jaya. He had never said it, but Emma had figured it out. She also knew why he had never said it. Humans and Valcorians breathed different atmospheres, and they were not immune against each other's diseases, not to mention the simple fact that in a month they would be heading back to Earth. So her uncle had simply given up on them ever being together. At the moment, Emma and William were in their quarters. Emma was asleep in her bed, while William was writing notes on a paper pad with a pencil. He was working on his schedule for tomorrow. Nearby, a holographic screen was playing the daily news feed. In other news, the newsreader began, Princess Lyra has permanently relocated to the ruling palace. Her marriage to the artist Markle IV is scheduled to take place in 2 days. The royal family had 6 palaces on the Valcor Prime. While everybody simply called it the Royal Palace, the palace William and Emma lived in was officially called the Heir's Palace. Until 2 days ago, Lyra had ruled it with an iron fist, and one day her children would live here. He just hoped that they would be kinder to the staff. Several thousand kilometers away, King Hiram was packing up his belongings. Well, his staff was doing the packing while he was overseeing the process. He was in his bedchambers talking to his aides when a loud curse from next door interrupted the conversation. Lyra had moved into the neighboring bedchamber 2 days ago and was already making the staff's life miserable. "Poor people," Ridak said. "I'm glad I'm not them." Hiram smiled at Ridak. Nobody else would have had the nerve to say what he had just said, but Ridak was his chief aide. He had been Hiram's aide since he was 16 years old. Somewhere along the way, they had become friends. It had been Ridak that had introduced him to Lyra's mother, Princess Jala, and it had led to the 60 happiest years of Hiram's life. "So, has Mr. Markle settled in already?" Hiram asked. "Yes, Hiram. He was the only one allowed to call the king by his first name. Well, now that Jala was gone. I heard about the fit he threw after poor Emma broke his art installation in the Earth Embassy. He's going to be a handful as well." "Yes, he is. Let's not add to their suffering and make sure our part of the equation keeps running smoothly." "Yes, sire." Hiram smiled and they got back to overseeing the operation. On the day of the wedding, Emma was sneaking around the heir's palace. School had finished for the day and she was caught up on her homework. Uncle William wouldn't have dinner ready for another hour, so she had time to go exploring. That was when she noticed the door to the throne room was open. She looked around, but there were no guards in sight, so she tiptoed to the door and poked her head in. There were scaffolds, tools, and all sorts of construction materials, but the throne itself was missing. Emma looked around one more time, then continued to the middle of the round chamber. As she stood where the throne should be, she realized what they were doing. They were fixing the room. Then she remembered how King Hiram had complained about it the last time he was here. She had totally forgotten about that. Around her, the room's vaulted ceiling was being held up by thick stone columns. Apparently, the plan was to build walls between the columns. It would turn the room from a cycle into an octagon. Doing so would also make the room about half the size it was now. Emma realized that now that it was free from Lyra's influence, the heir's palace was going to change in more way than one. Then her communicator beeped with a message. The message read, "Dinner in 10 minutes. We're having tacos." Emma loved tacos, so she bolted from the room. Palace changes could wait. Princess Lyra was wearing the same dress her mother had worn during her wedding to her father. From the records she had seen, that had been a joyous occasion. Her wedding felt like a funeral. It was taking place in the Hall of Royal Command, which was the ruling palace's version of the throne room. As she entered, her eyes passed over the scene. Rows of officials from all over the empire and representatives from dozens of worlds stood beside the aisle. She'd seen the guest list, which had held over 6,000 names. That was the reason why the wedding had taken months to prepare. All the people had needed to be available, had needed the proper clearances, clothes, and somewhere to stay for the night. As she approached the man who would soon be her husband, she studied his face. Lyra had seen pictures of Markle, but this was the first time they were meeting face to face. He was old and wrinkly, with cold and distant eyes. She maintained the mask that was required of a princess, but her heart sank as she realized that this was how people had seen her. Lyra took her place next to her husband-to-be, while an ancient priest began droning the traditional wedding texts. Emma was packing the dishwasher about the time Lyra and Markle said their vows. The tacos had been amazing as always. As they had eaten and discussed their day, a live feed from the ruling palace had been playing the background. The wedding was being broadcast to the entire empire. But Emma didn't care. She and HFY were going to take another stab at the hedge maze in the royal gardens. Yesterday, they had shaved 10 minutes off the time it took them to complete it, but HFY kept insisting they could do better. The bell rang just as Emma finished packing the machine and turned it on. She opened the door to find Emma waiting. William smiled and told the girls to be careful. They promised they would be and ran off. However, before the door closed, William noticed something odd. Not with the girls, but he spotted Samok in the corridor. What was the ancient royal messenger doing here? Then the door closed and the question vanished. He had to plan tomorrow's shift. As soon as they had finished their wedding's vows, Hiren had spoke the traditional words of retirement, and she had been crowned queen of the greater Valcorian Empire. He had then announced that he would be moving to the heir's palace before walking out of her life. Lyra sat in her royal bedchamber. Her husband, Markle, had gone to his own chambers. The look on his face made it clear that they were only married in name. There was no warmth in his heart for her. She was now trapped in the kind of marriage she had always feared. Lyra cried and screamed in agony, but there was nobody to hear her. Her staff had put as much distance between themselves and the queen as soon as the doors had closed. Lyra was paying the bill for cruelty she had shown them. A month later, William Leyton closed his suitcase. He had paid off his debt to the Empire. Their passage back to Earth had already been arranged. In the corridor, Emma and HFY were hugging and crying. It made his stomach twist. These two girls didn't care about species or politics. They were simply two friends who didn't want to say goodbye. He gave them a moment, then put a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. The girls separated silently, but crying too hard to speak. William gently took Emma's hand and led her out of the palace. The transport was waiting for them. They boarded and were led to their cabin. 2 minutes later, the craft blasted off. On the surface, Jaya watched as the craft slowly shrunk until it was just a tiny dot in the sky. Then that dot vanished as the transport jumped into faster than light speed. She had not said goodbye to William. If she had seen him, she would not have been able to actually say it. And then she admitted it to herself. She was in love with him. Then she heard footsteps behind her and froze. The only windows in the palace were in the royal chambers at the top of the palace. Technically, she did not have clearance to be here. But the guards had understood and let her enter the empty chambers so she could watch her love leave. She turned to see Samok standing there. He calmly handed her an envelope that was sealed with the King Hiren's royal seal. Her hands were trembling as she opened the envelope. What was inside made her gasp. It had been 2 months since William and Emma had returned to Earth. Emma was back in regular school, while William had found a janitor/maintenance job at the local hospital. When he had gotten a letter from the Valcorian embassy requesting his presence, William's stomach had dropped. So he made sure to go when Emma was at school. As soon as he entered the lobby, he spotted a familiar figure standing and waiting for him. "Jaya," he managed to say as they approached one another. How is this possible?" She held up a handwritten letter with the royal seal at the bottom. "Hiren. He set up orders for me to be transferred here once you left. I love you, Jaya. I love you too, William." There was still the fact that they didn't breathe the same air, and that they were not immune to each other's diseases, but they had survived Princess Lyra. They would survive those problems as well.